Well, it's a mild afternoon, a slight breeze over at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, and sitting atop the Soyuz booster, 160 feet high, is the next crew set to launch to the International Space Station. They are NASA's Chris Cassidy and Roscosmos cosmonauts Anatoly Ivanishin and Ivan Vagner, and they are set to blast off in just under an hour from now at 3:05 a.m. Central Time, 4:05 a.m. Eastern Time here in the U.S. This is going to be the first crewed launch on the new Soyuz 2.1A booster, launching from Site 31 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. This type of booster was first launched during an unmanned mission last summer in preparation for today. And also notable, this is going to be the first launch from Site 31 since October of 2016, when NASA's Shane Kimbrough launched on Soyuz MS-02 as part of Expedition 49. I do want to start off with a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, anywhere you're tuning in from all over the world. I'm NASA's Dan Hewitt, coming to you live from NASA's Johnson Space Center here in Houston. We're going to be taking you through the countdown of the launch today, the ride uphill, and these three's journey to the International Space Station over the next several hours, ultimately docking and arriving and getting the crew on board back up to a full 6-person strength. And right now, teams of launch controllers are watching all the systems on the rocket, on the spacecraft, talking to the crew, and also looking at everything on the International Space Station, their ultimate destination. No issues being tracked right now. Fuel and oxidizer loading for the Soyuz began just a few hours ago. And one of those teams on the left there that you're looking at is over in Russia, in the control center just outside of Moscow in a town called Koryov. And then on the right, the International Space Station Flight Control Room here in Houston. We're coming to you from the White Flight Control Room today as part of the current situation. We're hopping between control rooms, the White Ficker and the Flight Control Room number 1, the usual Space Station Flight Control Room. Here in Mission Control, the team watching over the current expedition crew who are going to be preparing to support the arrival of the Soyuz MS-16 later today. Right now, our flight director is Anthony Varia. He's going to be leading the Orbit 1 team on for this morning. And just next to him is European astronaut Andreas Mogensen. He's serving as the Capcom, or the voice communication between everyone down here in Houston and the crew on board the station. And that crew on board right now are NASA astronauts Jessica Meir and Drew Morgan. They're up there with Russian cosmonaut and Space Station Commander Oleg Skoropochka. Morgan launched last summer on July 20th, the 50th anniversary of humanity's first steps on the moon. Mir and Skoropochka followed shortly after, launching last September. And then once the crew gets there today, the complement will be up to 6, but only for about a week. It's going to be a quick handover as Mir, Morgan, and Skoropochka will make their way back here to planet Earth, coming up on April 17th, bringing the space station back down to just 3. And as I mentioned just a little bit earlier, docking for the new crew will occur several hours from now later today after they complete the planned 4-orbit space flight. We're going to be bringing you live coverage of all of that later on this morning, right here on NASA TV at 8:30 a.m. Central Time for docking, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. They're scheduled to dock with the Poisk module that's up on the space-facing side. We call it Zenith of the Russian service module, also known as Zvezda. And then about 45 minutes after that, or about 45 minutes after we begin our coverage, we'll see that docking at about 9:15 a.m. Central. On the journey up there, though, the Soyuz tracking and telemetry is going to be downlinked to ground stations along the flight path, routed to the Russian Mission Control Center, again in Koryov, just outside of Moscow. Throughout our coverage today, both for launch and for the docking and the hatch opening later, if you have any questions that you want to ask, we'll be trying to take a couple on Twitter that you can ask using the hashtag AskNASA. And we'll try to get through a bunch of those throughout our coverage this morning, and then later on when we get to the docking later this morning. Today's launch is pretty notable for several reasons. The first being that this crew underwent their final weeks of spaceflight preparations during the current international health emergency, the COVID-19 pandemic, changing things for people all around the globe, and this crew and their preparation no different. So things will look a little bit different this time compared to typical Soyuz launch preparations, mainly just like a lot of other things. You're seeing personnel kind of trimmed down to just the bare necessities. But of course, NASA, all of our international and commercial partners, even always taking steps to prevent the crew from getting any sickness or illness. They go through something called health stabilization, spending about 2 weeks in quarantine before their launch. So this crew on board has been kept in that strict quarantine for the last 2 weeks, limiting contact with anybody outside of flight surgeons and those already cleared, and also in quarantine themselves before they launch. That's actually standard operating procedure for space station missions, as we obviously want to keep these astronauts healthy before they leave. Any medical assistance or anything like that you have down here on the ground, don't want to bring a cold or anything more severe up to the space station. So thanks to that thorough protocol that we already have in place, the crew safe and healthy and ready to launch today on board this Soyuz. Another fairly noteworthy aspect of their upcoming expedition is during their stay, we're anticipating the first ever crewed launch from NASA's Commercial Crew Program on the SpaceX Demo 2 flight test. That's going to be NASA astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken launching in that SpaceX Dragon. They're expected right now to launch from somewhere between mid to late May, and all the teams down here on the ground continuing with the training for that mission. Also, in light of all the circumstances right now, the crew finishing up their final training, and everyone very excited to see these space flights once again return to America here. So that expected to take place during Expedition 63 while the crew is on board the station. So really getting excited for that. The crew's also going to be on board for a big chunk of this year, where we are celebrating a year-long celebration of the International Space Station's 20th anniversary. You'll see that little ISS 20 and a whole bunch of stuff all over NASA TV. We're marking 20 years of human beings living on board the International Space Station. So every single day since November of 1990 or November of 2000, we have had men and women living on board the International Space Station. There is an entire generation on planet Earth that, as long as they have been alive, not every single human has been on Earth with them. And so we're just really celebrating that accomplishment. That takes a lot of work from a lot of different teams, organizations, governments, and dedicated professionals all over the globe. And they've been supporting them 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and we'll hit that 20-year mark later in November. And that milestone really meant something special to someone part of this mission, NASA's Chris Cassidy, and he had a couple of words to share.
Well, it's significant for the space station's been operating brilliantly for those 20 years, but for me personally, Bill Shepard was the commander of Expedition 1, and I'll be the commander of Expedition 63 at the 20-year mark. We both have our roots in the Navy SEAL teams, and so I have a particularly fond thoughts about how the Navy guys, particularly the SEAL team guys, are in command in the beginning and end of that 20-year period. But it also shows that we, as a collection of nations, have been able to build, sustain, operate this amazing thing called the space station, and all that we're learning is going to help us go to the moon and to Mars. So the space station's a marvelous piece of machinery, and just imagine your car working for 20 years. You know, you'd be very happy when you get to that 20th year, and the space station's doing much better than your car.
And those are just some quick words from him. Obviously, we want to get to know our crew members on board this Soyuz a little bit more, so why don't we first learn a little bit more about NASA's Chris Cassidy. In the Soyuz's right-hand seat for today's spaceflight is NASA astronaut and United States Navy Captain Chris Cassidy. Cassidy was selected for the 2004 NASA astronaut class and, to date, has 2 spaceflights and 6 spacewalks on his resume. He's also a decorated Navy SEAL and calls the city of York, Maine, his home. He was born in 1970 in Salem, Massachusetts, and later attended York High School in Maine. Cassidy holds degrees from several institutions, including a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from the United States Naval Academy and a Master of Science in Ocean Engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Cassidy served as a Navy SEAL for 11 years before being selected as an astronaut, deploying for a total of 4 times to areas in Afghanistan and the Mediterranean, and was awarded 2 Bronze Stars along with other military recognitions for his service. He became a Navy captain in 2014 and never one to back down from a challenge, completed the Ironman triathlon in Hawaii that same year. As an astronaut, he made his first journey into space in July of 2009, launching from Cape Canaveral, Florida aboard the shuttle Endeavour. While there, he and the rest of the crew assembled the final parts of the Japanese experiment module, installed additional science experiments, and safely delivered and stored away parts and batteries for future use on the International Space Station. And this mission made Cassidy the 500th person in history to fly into space. Cassidy flew for the second time in 2013, and it was his first launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. He has logged 182 days in space and 31 hours and 14 minutes total spacewalking time over these 2 space flights. Back on Earth, he served as NASA's chief astronaut from 2015 to 2017 and was awarded the NASA Exceptional Achievement Medal. He will take over as the International Space Station commander next week when the current commander, Alex Kropotchka, hands over the keys in the station's change of command ceremony. And he's obviously joined by 2 cosmonauts inside that Soyuz spacecraft, Anatoly Ivanishin and Ivan Vagner. Let's take a moment to get to know them a little bit better, as we are right now just about 52 minutes and 35 seconds away from launch. Seated in the capsule's center seat is today's Soyuz MS-16 commander and Roscosmos cosmonaut Anatoly Ivanishin. Ivanishin is a decorated retired Russian Air Force colonel who was assigned to the Cosmonaut Corps in 2003, completing his training and examinations in 2005. He was born in 1969 in Irkutsk, Russia, located in Siberia. He would go on to graduate high school in 1986 and then Air Force pilot school in Russia in 1991. He holds several pilot licenses and logged a total of 550 hours of flying during his military career. His flight aboard the Soyuz today will mark the 3rd space flight of his cosmonaut career. He first traveled to space in November of 2011 as part of Space Station Expeditions 29 and 30. He returned to the station in July of 2016, serving as Soyuz commander aboard the very first flight of the MS series Soyuz spacecraft you see today. To date, Anatoly Ivanishin has 280 days of spaceflight under his belt and several space-related recognitions, including the 50th anniversary of Manned Spaceflight Medal, the NASA Spaceflight Medal, and the NASA Distinguished Public Service Medal. Seated to the left of Ivanishin today and prepared for his first ever journey into space is cosmonaut Ivan Vagner. He was assigned to the Cosmonaut Corps in October of 2010 and was certified as a test cosmonaut by August 2012. Vagner comes from a town called Severodonetsk, located in the western region of Russia. He graduated from his hometown high school in 2002 and went on to Baltic State Technical University in St. Petersburg, Russia, where he would earn a Master of Science in Space Rocketry. He held several positions in the space industry before becoming a cosmonaut, including working as an engineer on the flight control team in Mission Control Moscow. Having spent the past few years as a trained backup crew member for various expeditions, Vagner is set to start logging his own total time in space in just a few hours. And that music that you're now hearing is actively being pumped into the Soyuz spacecraft. It's common for the flight controllers to pump in some music to the crew while they're strapped in. They've been on board the Soyuz now for a couple hours, and now we're going to take a look at what their path was like to get there. The day's activities in Baikonur began a couple of hours ago as the crew was awakened about 6 p.m. Central Time on April 8th. It was 4 in the morning over there in Baikonur. The prime crew in front, the backup crew just behind them. You can see Chris Cassidy there. They walked out of the Cosmonaut Hotel. Before leaving, they went through a time-honored tradition of signing some doors, which is, there are a lot of traditions in Russian spaceflight that you'll hear about, and you'll see several of those today. But the crew signed some doors, and then they did the walkout. Usually a lot more crowds packed there, but again, just in light of the situation, fewer people there to see them off on their way. They departed the Cosmonaut Hotel and then boarded this bus for a 40-minute ride from the town of Baikonur onto the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Their destination was the Integration and Suit-Up Facility, also called Building 254, on the Cosmodrome grounds. See a Russian Orthodox priest there on the left. Another tradition with these space flights. He's there to bless the crews in the morning, also blesses the rocket typically 1 or 2 days before the launch after it's been erected on the pad. Here we see them arriving at their first destination of the day. That's the Integration and Suit-Up Facility, also known as Building 254 on the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Once they get there, each of the crew member undergoes a final medical exam, and then they get into their Sokol launch and entry suits. This is the suit you can see Ivanishin getting in here. These are suits that can be pressurized in the event of a loss of cabin pressure inside of the Soyuz spacecraft, providing pressurization, breathing gases for the crew members. They're assisted by a number of suit techs. Some of the more interesting parts, like that blue knob on his front, is how they can actually adjust the pressure inside of the suit itself. Each crew member also fitted with a comm cap, commonly referred to as the Snoopy cap, that has microphones and also earpieces inside for them to communicate with each other and also with the launch conductors down there at Baikonur, and then once in orbit with the flight controllers down on the ground. Ivanishin was suited up first, and then he was joined by Vagner, who again is making his first flight into space today. This is going to be Ivanishin's third and Cassidy's third. And last but not least, they were joined by NASA's Chris Cassidy, again getting into his Sokol launch and entry suit. This all taking place in the suit-up and integration building on the Baikonur Cosmodrome. They undergo that final medical exam, and then trained suit technicians help them get into these Sokol suits. They're going to wear these for all of the dynamic phases of flight. And for these short trips to the International Space Station, relatively short, 6 hours instead of the 2 days that it was several years ago, they'll stay in these suits pretty much the entire time, eventually doffing or getting out of their suits after they dock to the space station and before they open up the hatches. And then after the suit up, they move into this next room, which has a pane of glass. This is typically where we would see crew members, after going through a pressure check, get a chance to speak with friends, family that were able to travel to the launch site, and also some personnel. We do see some NASA personnel there, as Tricia Mack and John McBride. Tricia Mack, the head of the NASA office in Moscow, coordinating all of the activities for crews flying and returning in Soyuz spacecraft. John McBride helping out with the astronaut office over there as well. And those are two of really the main individuals that are there at the launch. Again, typically you see a larger contingent, family, friends able to travel to Baikonur, not able to do it this time around with all of the travel restrictions. But this room still serves a very important purpose. This is where they actually go through a pressure check of the suit itself, so you'll actually see it. It gets plugged in, they get into a seat that's a mold essentially, or a mock-up of the Soyuz seat itself, and you can see Ivanishin in there, and his suit actually puffs up a little bit. They're pressurizing it, so they're feeding breathing gas, typically using a nitrox mixture. So a similar composition of what we have in our atmosphere down here on Earth, getting fed into the suits, and it's able to provide pressure as well. And again, these suits worn for all of the dynamic phases of a flight. So all of the launch and ascent, all of the rendezvous operations with the station, and then they will be in these exact same suits when they make their way home at the end of their mission for a deorbit and landing. One interesting note about the suits: this is a of the seats. This is a mock-up of the seat. Each of the crew members on board the Soyuz has a specially molded seat liner. They actually sit in basically a gutted-out version of what you can see Vagner in right now, and plaster mold is poured all around them to conform to their body, and they get a special seat liner that is then installed in the seat, and that's why every single crew member also has they have assigned seats. Chris Cassidy's in the right seat today. The left seater, also known as the board engineer in the Soyuz spacecraft, is essentially the backup for the center seat where the Soyuz commander sits. Soyuz commander prime for all of the vehicle's operations, for manual control of the vehicle, should they have to take over for the rendezvous and docking, or any of the other phases of the flight. And again, one by one, the crew's going through, getting a chance to do these pressure checks. We won't be seeing, again, the interaction through the glass. Pretty much all of the media, most of the crew family, spouses, children, and even a lot of the industry officials weren't permitted to travel to the launch zone for this. Just again, always keeping the health and safety of the crew paramount in all of the planning. Again, those individuals in the room are required to either maintain the exact same quarantine as the crew, or wear a lot of the PPE, the personal protective equipment, in order to interact with them. This is the standard procedure for every single space station crew launching to the International Space Station. It's called health stabilization. It's been around as long as we've been doing these long duration flights.
Как настроение, как готовность? Хорошо. Мы провели заседание государственной комиссии сегодня рано утром. Проверили все технические службы. Все идет по плану, все нормально, поэтому готовимся к пуску в назначенное время. И что хочу сказать. Желаю вам успешного старта и полета.
I wish you successful launch and good luck, guys. You've done everything you could during your training. Everything's nominal on board, everything's nominal with the launch vehicle. Everything's going to be nominal. And I, guys, wanted to ask you, please don't break anything on board. And the equipment will work well if you don't break it. Despite everything, you are keeping your cool, and there is no rush. Slow and steady makes it.
This is your day. You worked so hard to get here, and I hope everything goes absolutely perfectly. Enjoy every moment. Enjoy your new home station, and know that we are all here on the ground supporting you and welcoming you home in October. Take care.
Irkut, this is Baikonur launch lead. Please adjust your shoulder straps and lower straps.
And after those leak checks and getting a chance to talk to a number of officials, among them Dmitry Rogozin, Sergei Krikalev, and NASA's Trisha Mack, the crew is ready to walk out. Individuals gathered for the final walk down. They come up and salute the head of the Roscosmos, the head of Roscosmos, Dmitry Rogozin, there on the right.
To the head of the State Commission, the commander of the Soyuz crew reporting. We are ready. Good luck.
Again, maintaining the tradition, one final time declaring they're ready for launch, and then they're on their way to the bus, waving a thumbs up there from Chris Cassidy, and then they get on the ride to pad 31.
Отходим. Неудобно одного тень космонавта.
And then once the crew arrived at pad 31, again, officials from their respective space agencies able to lead them to the final steps before they make their way up to the elevator, taking them to the top of the Soyuz booster. Again, about 160 feet tall, the Soyuz spacecraft sitting on top inside of a protective launch shroud.
Ivan.
Again, they were able to climb up those stairs, wave goodbye to the final well-wishers there at the pad, ride the elevator up to the top of the Soyuz to board the capsule, and as of this moment, they've been on board for about 2 hours. In fact, just before we came on the air, at about 1:53 a.m., they were getting ready to step through their leak checks on their spacesuits. They, about 5 minutes later, reported that they had completed all the leak checks on the hatches of the Soyuz spacecraft, and the crew kicked off those leak checks, closing their visors and pressurizing their suits. And we'll be getting a couple of views inside the cabin throughout our coverage and the ride uphill this morning. Right now, the crew, last time we checked in, had their visors back open, but we'll see those get closed right before the launch begins. And as mentioned earlier, the road to this launch has been anything but normal, a little unusual, and it began with our cosmonauts, Ivanishin and Vagner, who were previously the backup crew, finding out that they were launching on this Soyuz spacecraft, and that occurred just a few weeks before the final training began, or the final training exams began, which ended up turning out to be pretty good timing.
Of course, it was a surprise. We thought that we would be flying in October 2020, but life happens. And any backup crew is ready to become prime. And sometimes it actually happened at Baikonur. But we were lucky. We had some time for the news to actually settle in.
And just like Ivanishin mentioned, they, along with Chris Cassidy, have been training for this mission for a few years now, and they were very prepared, ready to fill in these roles, even under the unusual circumstances. There were some increased health and safety precautions that were put in place over the last several weeks. Again, though, thankfully we have a very robust health stabilization plan in place, so not too much needed to change with the crew themselves. But some of the traditional pre-launch activities had to be restructured, shortened, or even replaced, all just to ensure that we had a very thorough quarantine condition for the crew.
Well, it's been interesting. Life for us in the pre-launch period is always in quarantine. So for me, I knew I was going to be in quarantine these 2 weeks. But what's really different is everybody else around us is in quarantine too, just like the rest of the world. And to see the impacts on that in terms of who from NASA can come over to support launch, even which the Russian operational support team will be much smaller. My family and launch guests will not be able to come. So it'll be a really, really skeletal crew there in the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which will be quite different.
Kentucky woman, she shines with her own kind of light. She look at you once in a day, that's all wrong, that's all right. And I love her, God knows I love her. Kentucky woman, she gets to know you, she goes to own you. Kentucky woman, she ain't the kind that gets hurt at the drop of a name. Something inside that you got turns you on just the same. And she loves me, God knows she loves me. Kentucky woman, she gets to know you, she goes to own you. Kentucky woman, don't want much. Good Lord, there beneath my feet, gentle touch. That one girl and life is tender. Ain't no doubt. Talking about Kentucky woman, she gets to know you.
All right, and we're back at the launch pad now. You can see the gantry arms beginning to pull back that service structure, providing access to the rocket itself. One of the final tasks down there at the pad before we're ready for launch. The rocket that you're looking at right now went through all the standard preparations earlier this week. The spacecraft itself was mated to the booster, and the three main stages were all joined together. And then on Monday, the Soyuz rocket began its trek to the launch pad, where it was raised to its vertical position for final pre-launch preparations. And this is some video from, again, earlier this week on Monday. The Soyuz going out business end first from the integration and mating facility, and it's a much shorter path than you might have seen from previous launches that went from pad number 1, Gagarin start, as we are again using pad 31 this time for the first time since a crew including astronaut Shane Kimbrough launched from it back in October of 2016. All this because we are on this new Soyuz 2.1A booster, It's just an upgraded version of the Soyuz rocket that's been used to carry crew members into space for over 50 years now. The Soyuz itself sits high above the 3 stages of that Soyuz booster, which uses kerosene, a highly refined version of kerosene, commonly referred to as rocket fuel, and liquid oxygen as the propellant. The first stage itself has 4 liquid engines. The first stage itself has 4 liquid engines that are strapped to the side of the core vehicle. Each one of those is going to burn for about 1 minute and 58 seconds before they drop away.
Select on the first info panel.
And then the core engine itself also serves as the second stage.
Please do not switch the info.
And we'll see that core stage continue to burn until about 4 minutes, 37 seconds into today's flight. And the third stage has a single engine. We'll see that ignite just before it separates from the second stage. They do something called hot staging. There's actually a lattice work structure between the second and third stages that allows the exhaust from the rocket itself to expel out as it's igniting, still attached to the second stage. The third stage will help push it away safely, and then that will burn until 8 minutes and 46 seconds into today's flight. At that point, the Soyuz spacecraft will separate from the third stage, and it will be in its preliminary orbit. And as mentioned at the start of our show, we did say we were going to try and get to some of your questions, so we can go through a couple of those right now. Again, if you do have a question for today's launch, docking, or hatch opening coverage, you can send it in on Twitter using the hashtag AskNASA. So first we'll start off with one from Vishnu Sarath, who wanted to know at what time after the launch will the abort tower be ejected. That launch escape tower is jettisoned at 1 minute 54 seconds into the flight, but that is not the only piece of the launch escape system. There are also solid rocket motors on the capsule fairing itself that can be used after the tower is jettisoned to still pull the vehicle away. In fact, those were the ones that were used back on October 11, 2018, when the Soyuz MS-10 spacecraft carrying Nick Hague and Alexei Ovchinin encountered a launch escape. And so, again, just to answer you, 1 minute 54 seconds. Our next one comes from Sai, who wanted to know if the station crew get to keep their phones on board the ISS. They don't bring their phones with them. Your cell phone here on planet Earth relies on ground station towers in order to communicate, and they're a little too high up for those to work. They do have basically a voice over IP phone, so a phone that uses data using the data streams that also send telemetry, data, video, everything from the International Space Station, and they're able to call people here on Earth. It actually works just like voice over IP, and they can just dial cell phone numbers here on Earth, and they can call you from space. And so we'll just do those two for now, and we will get to a little bit more a little bit later in today's launch. For now, though, let's keep on going through. Let's take a look at the Soyuz spacecraft, which it's still encased in that shroud. We'll see it in space a little bit later when it arrives at the International Space Station. But going through some quick facts, the Soyuz, 23.5 feet long, weighing in at 15,650 pounds, and is comprised of 3 different modules. The one right in the middle, that's the descent module, and that contains all the customized seats for the crew, all the controls and displays necessary for the flight, should the crew need to take control and fly the Soyuz spacecraft, also just giving them insight into all of its systems, both on the spacecraft and the rocket. Also has all of the life support systems, batteries for re-entry and landing, and the parachutes and the soft landing rocket engines that are used to slow the Soyuz just before touchdown when they land in Kazakhstan. The descent module weighs 6,393 pounds and can carry about 110 pounds of payload that can be returned back down to Earth with the module, usually bringing down some cold samples, blood samples, things like that with the crew when they return. And that is, most importantly, the only portion of the Soyuz that has a heat shield, so it's able to survive the fiery re-entry through Earth's atmosphere. The orbital module's up on top. That connects to the descent module via a pressurized hatch. There's a hatchway between it and the descent module that the crew can get through. It has a small amount of room inside that they can move around during the flight to station. On the very top, it has that docking mechanism, the hatch, and also the rendezvous antenna is located at the very front end. There's also a forward-looking window they're able to look out, and they can take manual measurements as they're on final approach to the International Space Station. You can use a laser rangefinder in the event that they have any issues with their automated rendezvous system. Then at the bottom there is the propulsion of the instrumentation module that has all of the oxygen storage tanks, the main engine, the attitude control thrusters, avionics, and communications and control equipment. The propulsion portion of the module handles all the orbital maneuvers, so it has those engines that are needed for the rendezvous with the space station. Also the deorbit burn at the end of the spacecraft's mission. And then before they are deployed, there are 2 solar arrays, which give the Soyuz a wingspan of about 35 feet. Right now they're folded against the body of the propulsion module. Once they get into space, we'll see them unfurl and start providing electrical power to the station systems. Both the propulsion module and the orbital module actually separate from the descent module after the deorbit burn at the end of a mission, and they burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. The entire spacecraft serving not only as the transport vehicle to and from the station, but it actually acts as their emergency return vehicle, so their lifeboat essentially, should the crew need to leave the station unexpectedly. For every crew member on board, you always have a seat in a spacecraft for them docked to the space station. Just checking in, we are 22 minutes, 20 seconds and counting to today's launch. The crew, at this point, again, had already conducted their suit leak checks. They're just standing by now at this point until we get to that launch point. The crew going through all those pre-launch procedures inside the capsule. We're still continuing on with this countdown for today. Once they leave the Earth's atmosphere a little bit later this morning, this is going to be the 3rd trip into space for NASA's Chris Cassidy. And before heading back into orbit, he spent a moment just sharing with us the special perspective that he's been able to gain about the International Space Station, the place that he's very soon going to be calling home once again.
The space station is much bigger than people think. You know, when you tell people that I'm going to go live in space, they're picturing this tiny thing where you've got to turn your shoulders, excuse me, to pass each other in the hallway like a cramped submarine. But it's big. And you can spend a whole day and never see a crewmate except for maybe a meal. The other thing people don't realize, it's a machine. Just like your car, or your house, or your air conditioner. It's gonna break, and stuff does. It's just the nature of machinery. Because people sometimes, what, it broke? What do you mean NASA has a thing that's broken in space? Well, yeah, it's a machine, it's gonna break. And that's what we need to do, is keep it running. At the end of the day, there's several things in a mission that requires a person to turn a wrench and fix it. On my first mission, I was a shuttle crew member, and we were helping construct the space station. My second mission as a space station crew member, we were just kind of getting up on step on really pushing the science systems of the space station and getting the most out of all of the assets that the space station has to give for science and research. Now I think we are just humming along with the science and research. The greater community and particularly the specialists in Building 30 and Mission Control really know how to run the space station and keep it going well so that we can devote tons of astronaut hours to science. That anniversary is kind of Special to me in the sense that Bill Shepard was the commander of Expedition 1, United States Navy SEAL, and I will be the commander of Expedition 63, 20 years later, a United States Navy SEAL. So there's been three of us, Shep, myself, and now Johnny Kim, who have come from the SEAL community to be astronauts, and I think it's really pretty cool that there's the bookends of the 20 years of station will be commanded by Shep and myself. What am I looking forward to most on this mission? This is my third one, and I am going into it with the mindset of I'm going to cherish every single day that I'm there, because it might be the last days that I get to look out the cupola window and see Earth. So I'm really looking forward to appreciating every one of those days. I'll be happy to get back to Earth, to be with my family, but I'm really looking forward to valuing each of those days while I'm there. I'm astronaut Chris Cassidy. Thanks for being part of Expedition 63.
Back now with the live view of that Soyuz rocket. Just reiterating that final scene you saw there. If you want to follow Chris in his mission, as he's spending about 6 months on board the International Space Station, get an inside look at what it's like to live, work in space. Follow him on Instagram. He's at @astro_seal. But just with a quick check-in, we are 17 minutes 40 seconds away from today's launch. Take a couple more minutes now and answer a few more of your Ask NASA questions. Again, if you have any, use the hashtag AskNASA, send them in, and we will go through them. First off, we have one from Andrew Borger, who asked a question about the training that they've gone through. How long have they been waiting for this day? And also, how much thrust has this rocket let out? Crews for the space station typically train for about 2 years, and that's to get familiarization on all of the systems on board the International Space Station that they'll be interacting with, whether they're fixing it, working on experiments, if they're doing spacewalks. There's just a lot of knowledge to try and gather and train, and it takes about 2 years to do that. They're also going through spacecraft-specific training, so this crew had to train on the Soyuz spacecraft systems, be able to respond in the event of an emergency, be able to fly the vehicle if you're the Soyuz commander or the backup, and they actually do final exams. It's almost like going back to college for a lot of these crew members. So about 2 years of training. And then how much thrust does the rocket let out? The first stage of this Soyuz spacecraft delivers about 930,000 pounds of thrust. And then our next one comes from Robert Guzman, who asked, when the astronauts come back to Earth, is their immune system weakened by their stay in space? It's a really interesting question, and that's something that we actually have a lot of different research studies taking place. The human body adapts extremely quickly to new environments. It's both a blessing and a curse with stuff like spaceflight. It starts to affect a lot of things like bones, muscles, and even immune systems in these astronauts. They've seen that it can actually affect your immune system. It can even weaken your immune system a little bit. And that's just one of the many things that we have to really understand as we look to not only send humans further than we've ever gone before, going forward to the moon, eventually onto Mars, just to keep people safe when they're in space, but also very importantly when they come home. We've also found that a lot of stuff that happens to your body when you're on the space station has a lot of parallels for ailments here on Earth. A lot of things that happen to your body, like bone wasting and muscle loss and things of that nature, mimic a lot of the effects of aging. And so we're able to use these astronauts, and while we're trying to really understand what happens to them while they're in outer space and how to best take care of them, a lot of those lessons can actually translate to making life better for humans back down here on the ground. We're going to keep moving on, but again, keep sending those questions in. We'll be doing a whole bunch later today when we get to the docking show, so just keep using that hashtag AskNASA. And we've talked about it a couple of times here today, spaceflight. It's all about traditions, and in keeping with that, every single expedition mission, just like every NASA program, every crew is given their very own patch with a unique design that helps to commemorate their mission and their crew members. And this is a look at the Expedition 63 patch. It's definitely one of my personal favorites. It's a very cool, interesting looking one. It's an intersection of both the past and the beginning of a new dawn in human spaceflight. As we not only continue to stay on board the station, we're about to commemorate 20 years of continuous flight, but also look at putting humans once more on the moon and then getting ready to not too far after, head on to Mars. 13 of the stars in the patch along the top commemorate the Apollo 13th, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary during Expedition 63. And then that swoosh orbiting around the Earth and the Moon honors the Apollo program and future missions that will go beyond low Earth orbit once again. And then the atom is the crew's call sign, symbolizing the energy to resolve or orbit around a nucleus, or in their case, planet Earth. And another tradition that the astronauts and cosmonauts like to take part in is selecting what's known as a zero-G indicator to hang above them in the ceiling of the capsule. So we'll see this floating just above the center seat for Anatoly Ivanishin. Sometimes each crew member has their own. For this one in particular, the Anatoly Ivanishin is taking what he's just calling Space Bear. It's a toy that will become very symbolic for him and is going to be a significant gift for his future grandchildren one day. So that'll be hanging inside the Soyuz capsule when we get those in-cabin views, and it's called a zero-G indicator, and we literally use that just to see when you start to see that float, and that happens right after they separate from that third stage. You'll see the crew exposed to microgravity. That'll be one of your best indications, because the crew themselves, obviously strapped into those seats, won't be floating around quite yet. But another system check-in. We're not tracking any issues with the vehicle right now. We're 12 minutes, 25 seconds, and counting away from launch. All right, so we are getting closer. You're 11 and a half minutes away from launch right now. All told, it'll be just under a 9-minute ride to orbit for the crew today. They're going to be launching at 3:05 a.m. Central Time, 4:05 a.m. Eastern. We'll be looking for a number of milestones on the ride uphill. One of the first major ones is going to be the launch escape system jettison. That comes about 1 minute 54 seconds into the flight. The first stage will cut off and separate those 4 strap-on liquid-fueled boosters at 1 minute 58 seconds. After that's done successfully, the launch shroud, so that area on top actually protecting the Soyuz spacecraft from aerodynamic forces on the ride uphill, will next separate at 2 minutes and 33 seconds into flight. The second stage will shut down at 4 minutes 37 seconds, separating at 4 minutes and 48 seconds. As that happens, the third stage will begin firing, doing what's called a hot fire technique. And again, we get a close-up on the rocket, you'll be able to see the lattice work-like structure between the second and third stages of the Soyuz spacecraft, allowing that engine to fire while they're still attached. The third stage lower skirt jettison coming in 4 minutes 56 seconds, and then the final thing that we'll be looking for is going to be that third stage shutdown.
Launch lead, please close your visors. L-5 minutes.
And you just heard the crew told 5 minutes readiness. We are 10 minutes away from launch. They're going to close their visors now in their SOCA launch and entry suits.
Baikonur launch lead, we confirm our visors are closed. Irkutsk, This is Baikonur launch lead. Copy. And you are ready. And we are under 8 minutes and 30 seconds away from launch. Once we hit that 7 minute mark, the pre-launch operations will be complete. We pretty much get into game time. That's when things will start to pick up. We'll go through a couple more manual steps, including inserting the launch key into the launch bunker, something that never gets old saying and is one of my favorite little tidbits about the space flight, that they have an actual launch key, and they'll get that inserted at about T-minus 6 seconds. So we'll hear the call out launch key inserted. You will be continually hearing an interpretation of the chatter between the launch conductors there in Baikonur, the team in Mission Control Moscow, and the crew. So you'll hear one voice, that's our interpreter's voice. So if it sounds like someone is talking to themselves, that is one person having both sides of the conversation. Here's a view of Chris Cassidy. Again, he's in the right seat today. This is going to be his third trip into outer space. We heard the crew call that their visors are closed, and you can see them there in their seats. Irkut, this is Baikonur launch lead. We are at L-1 minute. And I will be reading out the numbers to you guys. Copy. We confirm L-1 minute.
And throughout the operations today, you're going to be hearing the Soyuz referred to as Irkut, I-R-K-U-T, and that is Anatoly Ivanishin's call sign, paying tribute to his birthplace of Irkutsk.
Irkut 1, everything's nominal on board, and we're ready for launch. We copy, Irkut.
Ivanishin reporting everything nominal or normal on board the spacecraft, and they are ready for launch. We are 6 minutes, 22 seconds and counting away from liftoff.
Key to start.
And we have confirmation the launch key has been inserted in the launch bunker that transitions the launch sequence into its automatic mode. So computers on the Soyuz rocket now taking command and stepping through pre-programmed procedures as we count down to launch. And just as a reminder, it's Anatoly Ivanishin in the center seat. He's the Soyuz commander. And then at the top of your screen is Ivan Vagner. He's in the left seat. He's the board engineer for today, essentially the backup role for the commander on board the spacecraft. And we'll also get views of Chris Cassidy. He's seated to Ivanishin's right.
Lines purge.
We are under 5 minutes away from launch. combustion chamber. The engine's being purged with nitrogen that helps to fireproof them, or removing any vapors of fuel or oxidizer. And we are now under 4 minutes away from launch. There will be a couple of visual indicators that can help you count down. The first umbilical tower will be separated from the booster at about 35 seconds before launch, but the second and final one separates at 15 seconds before launch. So once you see that second one separate, begin counting down from 15.
Есть дренаж.
And as we come up on 2 minutes and 30 seconds, you just heard the ground propellant feed has been terminated, so fuel and oxidizer no longer being loaded into the vehicle.
Venting confirmed. Repress confirmed.
And right now the booster's fuel tanks are being pressurized. This helps to just optimize and really facilitate the flow of the fuel. Also helps add a little bit of structural support to the rocket itself. We are inside 2 minutes to launch. And at this very moment, the International Space Station passing just overhead. At the moment of launch, though, it'll already be 587 statute miles ahead of the Soyuz spacecraft, flying just over northeast Kazakhstan, but just passed right over pad 31 there at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. 1 minute and 20 seconds to launch. T-minus 1 minute.
Земля, борт.
Confirm. Space to ground.
And we see that first umbilical tower separating. That means we're 35 seconds away from launch.
Launch.
And there goes the second tower, so we are 15 seconds away from launch. We're going to see the boosters at the bottom light up, and as their thrust builds, it'll eventually overcome.
Intermediate. Main one.
And liftoff. Cassidy, Ivanishin, and Vagner on their way to the International Space Station.
15 seconds into flight. All parameters are nominal. We confirm on board. All parameters are nominal. 20 seconds into launch. Thrusters are working nominally. The crew is feeling fine. 30 seconds. All parameters for the vehicle are nominal. The crew is feeling fine. 40 seconds into flight. Thrusters are working nominally and the vehicle is nominal.
Getting good continuous calls from the crew and the ground, everything with the vehicle looking nominal. The first stage powering the Soyuz upward, delivering 930,000 pounds of thrust from the 4 strap-on boosters and that single core engine.
Roll and yaw at 60 minutes into flight.
The yaw pitch roll, the attitude or which way it's pointing, hearing all those parameters or the status of it nominal.
70 seconds into flight. Everything's fine with the vehicle on our side. We confirm we're feeling good.
Again, this first stage going to continue to burn for just about 2 minutes into the flight. So just under a minute to go on the first stage.
90 seconds into flight. Thrusters are working nominally. We confirm and we're feeling well on board.
Soyuz continuing to retreat from view, already traveling well in excess of 1,100 miles per hour.
We confirm.
And seeing the Koryoff cross there as those strap-on boosters separate. The first stage separating right on time.
We also confirm lateral unit separation.
Their job done. They drop weight at an altitude of about 28 statute miles. The Soyuz traveling at about 3,300 miles an hour.
Vehicle stabilization is nominal. Everything's fine on board.
With the first stage in the launch escape tower now jettisoned, being powered by that second stage, the core stage.
We confirm the jettisoning of the
The shroud jettison and getting some views now from the Soyuz spacecraft itself, looking back towards the Soyuz rocket. You have a solar array right in front of your view there. The launch shroud has been jettisoned, so the Soyuz spacecraft now exposed.
70 seconds into flight. The vehicle is fine, and we are feeling well on board. This is Irkutsk.
Everything looking good with that core stage. The second stage,
190 minutes.
56 feet in length, 13.5 in diameter, has a single engine with 4 fuel chambers, provides between 178,000 and 222,000 pounds of thrust, depending on their altitude, for its 3 minutes and 28 seconds of operation. Again, the second stage is going to continue to burn. We're looking for second stage shutdown at about 4 minutes, 30 seconds after launch.
Parameters of the vehicle are nominal. We confirm we are feeling well.
секунд.
230 seconds into flight. The vehicle is stable. We copy and we confirm everything is nominal on board.
So we're a little over 4 minutes since launch. Again, we'll be looking for that shutdown and separation coming up in about 20 seconds. And as that separation occurs, the third stage will begin firing. It's called a hot stage technique. And that third stage will ignite while the second is still attached. And standing by for second stage shutdown.
Есть отделение второй ступени.
We confirm separation of stage 2. We see it as well. Everything's nominal on board. Copy.
And we have confirmation second stage shut down and separated, and you saw a piece fly off. That was the third stage's lower skirt jettison. That was targeted to come off at 4 minutes 56 seconds into launch. We're already past 5 minutes and 20 seconds. Third stage now going to continue to burn until we're at our orbital insertion, so the initial orbit of the Soyuz spacecraft, that's expected to come in about 8 minutes and 46 seconds at shutdown, and then the separation coming just 4 seconds later.
Into flight, and the thrusters are working nominally. We confirm, and everything's nominal on board.
So right now the Soyuz being propelled into orbit by the single engine of the third stage, providing 67,000 pounds of thrust, going to continue to burn until shutdown, coming in just under 3 minutes from now.
360 seconds into flight. Your pitch and roll are all nominal. Copy, and we are feeling well on board.
Still getting great updates from the crew. Anatoly Ivanishin talking to the ground. Everyone feeling well on board. Yaw, pitch, roll. The engines all performing nominally. That's the word we want to keep hearing. It means everything's going normally according to the plan. 6 minutes 35 seconds since liftoff.
390 seconds into flight. All control systems for the vehicle are working nominally. And we confirm we are fine on board. Copy.
$420.
420 seconds into flight. Your pitch and roll parameters are all nominal. Copy. We are fine on board.
And we just passed 7 minutes and 30 seconds into this flight.
450.
Spacecraft velocity right around 13,500 miles an hour.
Confirm. Irkutsk inaudible. We copy Irkutsk.
$470.
470 seconds into flight. Third stage thrusters are working nominally. Everything's well on board.
$490.
490 seconds into flight. The vehicle is stable.
And we're standing by. Our next major milestone is going to be the shutdown of that third stage, coming in about 20 seconds from now.
On board. Thank you for your support. 510 seconds into flight. Your pitch and roll are all nominal. Get ready for the stage separation.
So we'll see the engines cut off, and once the vehicle separates, it usually gives the crew a bit of a jolt. Then the Soyuz will be flying free. We see the third stage separating there. And we can see it dropping away now. Third stage separation confirmed.
And congratulations, guys. You are in orbit. I am handing you over to the Mission Control, Moscow.
And as we can see on the video here, that solar array deployed. We have confirmation the one on the other side also deployed, along with what's known as the appendages. All of the antennas, so the rendezvous and the communication antennas, all deployed on the Soyuz spacecraft.
Then we will be standing by for the first measurement, and then please proceed to page 39. MCC Moscow, this is Irkutsk 2. I am ready to give you. I am
So we'll stick with these views in the Soyuz as long as we still have them. They'll begin passing out of the range of the ground stations where we're able to get this video transmitted down eventually.
and I am
But everything looking like they're good in a good initial orbit. The orbital parameters, so looking at both speed and then their apogee, perigee, the orbit that they're in, looking good after a successful separation from that third stage. So with that, Chris Cassidy, Anatoly, Ivanishin, and Ivan Vagner are in outer space.
23rd, 327.
For Cassidy and Ivanishin, this is their third trip. For Wagner, his first. The crew now going through a number of their initial orbital checkouts. Again, one of the major things that we always look for is getting those solar arrays out, which provide all the electrical power to the systems on board the Soyuz spacecraft. Also, the antennas being deployed, and those were all confirmed to be done successfully, and we were able to get a view of one of those solar arrays popping out just shortly after that separation from the third stage.
And we confirm that we are ready to activate Control Panel 2. You have our go. Control Panel 2 is activated. And we are starting with Course 2 test. Copy.
And one of the first tests that they're going to be carrying out is a test of the CORS system. The CORS is the automated rendezvous and docking system that the Soyuz uses. It's able to fly autonomously all the way to the space station and then autonomously dock to the International Space Station itself. And so they're running through a checkout of that system. Once they get closer, they'll do system checks between the Soyuz and the station itself before they get in close for the eventual station keeping and then docking to the station. And their destination today is going to be the Poisk module, also known as the Mini Research Module number 2. And it's on the space-facing side of the Zvezda service module over on the Russian segment.
And please turn on the input panel at 12:36. We copy. We wanted to confirm, MCC Moscow, that Course 2 test was successful, and we are proceeding with Course 1 activation. All KDU sections switch over should be done per page 52, Irkutsk. And the switchover is at 12:10. We copy 12:10. And the next times for the SR altitude is 11:52 up to 12:06. Copy. And Course 1 activation went successfully.
К следующим сеансам связи мы с вами будем проводить тест ручного управления.
And Irkutsk, during our next COM session, we are going to be testing manual controls. And please send command IKV inhibits at 12:39:00. Copy. IKV inhibits at 12:39. MCC Moscow, this is Irkutsk 2. I have verified that all displays are working nominally. We are also standing by for a 5-minute measurement. MCC Moscow, we confirm attitude built. MCC Moscow, this is Irkutsk 2. 5-minute measurement. We are ready. SI is 05 Bill 827. instrumentation compartment 729. We copy.
And this is Mission Control Houston. If you're just now joining us, you've missed the best part. The launch was done successfully on time. We'll be bringing you some launch replays in just a little bit. But for right now, the crew on orbit in outer space in their Soyuz spacecraft. They're again stepping through all of the initial checkouts of the various systems, doing a check of the Corps' automated rendezvous and docking system, doing a leak check on the spacecraft itself. And they're monitoring all of these tests using those computer displays directly in front of the commander seat.
Ребят, как слышите меня?
Guys, how do you copy
Я вас поздравляю
me?
с введением на орбиту.
We read you loud and clear. Congratulations to you with such a successful insertion into orbit and launch.
По спутниковой навигации, похоже, выведение хорошее такое.
And we see it on our side on GPS that
Мы идем по короткой схеме.
it was a success, and I would like to confirm that we are going to stay with the 6 orbit
Одним словом, все у нас нормально.
docking plan.
Просьба, так сказать, спокойно.
All in all, everything's looking good. Just slow and steady makes it. We copy all. Thank you.
Крути, особенно, как я тебе рекомендовал вчера.
And please do as I taught you to. Copy.
And one important part from that conversation we were just listening in on, they are still continuing with this 6-hour rendezvous with the International Space Station, so everything looking good with the spacecraft and those initial checkouts, meaning they should be on time for a docking today, which we're currently tracking to 9:15 a.m. Central Time.
Иркут, это Москвы.
Irkut, MCC Moscow.
РПТВ на связи.
Go ahead. This is Irkut 1.
В рамочке по странице 37. Оставить ремень подтяга оболочки,
You have a go
открыть гермошлем,
to open your visors,
отключить термодатчики,
deactivate thermal sensors, and perform actions in the
заданное время отключаем термодатчики.
block on page 37. Copy. We'll put it in work.
Иван Кристофер, Севастьянов, добрый день.
This is Ivan Sevastianov.
Поздравляю вас с успешным запуском.
Congratulations, guys, on such a successful launch. Good luck. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Иркуты, параметры орбиты номинальные, все.
And the crew just getting some final congratulations from flight controllers in Koryov, just outside of Moscow at the Russian Mission Control Center. We're going to be taking the lead for overseeing the operations of the Soyuz spacecraft for the rest of its journey. While we stand by for those launch replays, we do have some replays of the in-cabin views that we weren't able to show during that initial ascent. So this again, just moments ago, as they lifted off. It's already been almost 20 minutes since liftoff. It's Ivanishin, Anatoly Ivanishin, the Soyuz commander, in the center seat there at the top of your screen, Ivan Vagner, making his first ride into orbit. At the time of this replay, they were actually under the full power of the Soyuz first stage. And you can see just how smooth the ride is uphill for these crew members inside. And again, just out of view, NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy in space for the 3rd time now. And if you're just now joining us, this is video from just minutes ago when they did launch. That launch came 21 minutes and 20 seconds ago. This is the in-cabin view, looking at Anatoly Ivanishin there at the bottom left corner. And Ivan Vagner, big smile on his face as he made his first ride uphill into outer space today. Right now, the crew is still inside the Soyuz capsule performing all those initial on-orbit checkouts. At this point, they've been given the go to open up their visors on their suits, also getting reminders to deactivate some thermal sensors on the Soyuz spacecraft itself, and then getting ready to extend the docking probe and doing a hand controller test. They have a hand controller in front of the commander's seat, able to actually control the Soyuz spacecraft itself, although if we go per the nominal plan, everything's just going to be done automated using that CORS rendezvous and docking system. That antenna was confirmed to have deployed shortly after the vehicle separated from the Soyuz rocket, along with the solar arrays. So again, just standing by for a few moments for those launch replays. We should be bringing them to you shortly. And here we go. These are replays. That launch came right on time at 3:05 a.m. Central Time, 4:05 a.m. Eastern. Soyuz MS-16 spacecraft taking off on the Soyuz rocket from pad 31. And these replays will cycle through a few different views of the rocket for you. At another replay, we'll stand by. We should have it, hopefully at least one more replay of that launch, which again came right on time, 3:05 a.m. Central, just about 25 minutes ago. While we do stand by, we did get confirmation that the docking probe, so that extends from the very top of the Soyuz spacecraft out of the orbital module, and that's used to do the final alignment into the docking compartment on the Poise module where they're going to be headed today. That was extended successfully, so all of the on-orbit checkouts continuing to go per the plan. We should be just under 20 minutes away from one of the first major firings of the engines on the instrumentation or the propulsion module of the Soyuz spacecraft, known as the DV-1 burn, a delta velocity #1 burn. And that'll be the first in a series of firings to gradually raise the Soyuz's orbit until it gets on the same level as the space station, currently orbiting an altitude of about 257 statute miles. Here we go, one more launch replay from just about 26 minutes ago.
sensation on 2 for Soyuz launch. Looked like a perfect launch and orbital insertion to us. We got a little peek out the cupola.
All right, and that'll do it for our replays of today's successful launch. While we were going into that third one, though, we actually did get a call down from the International Space Station. NASA astronaut Drew Morgan, one of the current residents on board, reported that they just watched the launch, and with everything looking good, they were ready to receive the crew members, and did mention that he's going to have dinner waiting for them. So both he and Jessica Meir and Alex Gorpochka just coming out of their sleep period, so this is bright and early in the morning for them. And in just about 6 hours from now, they're going to have 3 new crew members that they're going to be welcoming on board. But with that, we are going to take a break for now while the Soyuz continues to fine-tune its path towards the International Space Station over the next several hours. But we will, of course, be back for live coverage once we're here and ready for docking. So just coming up on NASA TV, we'll do a video file of the post-launch, just giving you, again, some more views of the launch and all of the major events from this morning's activities so far. And then we'll be back with our live coverage at 8:30 a.m. Central Time, 9:30 a.m. Eastern, for planned docking at 9:16 a.m. The hatch opening coverage will come just a few hours after docking. After they dock, they do a series of leak checks, and then they get ready to open the hatches and move into the station. So we'll begin that hatch opening coverage at 11 a.m. Central. The hatch opening targeted to come right around 11:30 a.m. Then we will wrap up today's coverage with a video file showing all of the highlights from docking and the hatch opening at 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern. So be sure to tune back in then. Keep sending those questions using the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. We'll have plenty of time to answer those as we move through the docking and the hatch opening show a little bit later this morning. And I do want to thank everyone for either staying up late or waking up early to tune in and watch this launch today. It was a rough time for everyone, so we truly appreciate it. So with that, we will go ahead and sign off. We'll be back in a few hours. This is Mission Control Houston.
It was plagued by bad omens and bad luck from the very beginning.
13, we've got one more item for you when you get a chance. We'd like it to stir up your cryo tanks.
It never really converged to the point where you felt you really had total control of what was going on.
Okay, Houston, we've